Welcome to the In Contrast 2025 Juror Talk, or the Maryland Federation of Art. My name is Eleanor Woodbury. I am the exhibitions manager here at MFA. MFA is a visual nonprofit organization that hosts more than 40 exhibitions every year. Our mission is to make connections in the local and online communities through art with exhibitions and events in Circle Gallery in Annapolis, Maryland, online and in numerous alternative venues. We provide artists of all genres, medias, and backgrounds with the opportunity to exhibit work selected by professionally credentialed jurors and to be recognized with monetary awards. Artists do not have to be members to enter our exhibitions. Members have several advantages: lesser entry fees, access to networking, and additional exhibition opportunities. If you're interested in learning more about becoming a member, please visit our membership page on our website. In contrast, this year, contrast is a dynamic force in artistic expression, shaping perception, guiding emotion, and commanding attention, whether through striking juxtapositions of light and dark, bold complementary hues, or the interplay of texture and form. Contrast heightens impact and deepens meaning. It's a tool that artists have used to create tension, harmony, and visual intrigue. Any 2D or 3D work that followed the exhibition guidelines were considered for this exhibition, and the works selected by our juror are displayed in the virtual gallery from December 15th to January 31st. I'm joined today by Professor Marcie Cooperman. She's a professor in the fashion department at the Parsons School of Design. She has a multidisciplinary career in the areas of fashion design and academia, authorship, color theory, interior design, and fine art. She teaches fashion marketing, fashion merchandising, social commerce, entrepreneurship, and color theory classes at the Parsons School of Design. She's also been a professor of color theory at the Pratt Institute of Design. She also teaches fashion design and fashion marketing in China at several pre-college design schools. Marcie's fashion degree, her Stern MBA, and eponymous knitwear business afford Marcie a well-rounded fashion business perspective. She also owns Fresh Interiors, a bespoke interior design business offering soup-to-nut services. You can find Marcie Cooperman online by Googling color theory expert professor.
Thank you. Very nice introduction. I really am very honored to be chosen as your juror, and I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
It's so much fun for me. I just love talking about art and color, and I love talking with artists. And luckily, I get to do that for my job, and it makes it more fun and less like work. And then that's what this feels like. It's just fun. So I want to thank you. I thought I would start by explaining and discussing a little bit about what I was looking for in this exhibition and how I came upon my choices, and then how I put them in a hierarchy. Aside from the fact that all for 30 years, I've been grading assignments every day, all the time, many of them art, many of them visual, merchandising and retail and fashion design in all different fields. I find that really the elements of composition and the elements of design and color are the same, no matter what the visual expression of art is. So aside from the fact that I'm just plain used to it, I always look for the same thing, and it's always fresh and new and exciting, just by virtue of the fact that the students are all different and come from many cultures and have many ways of expressing their feelings. So the subjectivity part of it is exciting and wonderful, and I'm not judging any of that. I am basically looking at the technical part, which I wanted to discuss a little bit briefly before we went into the pieces, where then I would be very specific about why I thought that piece deserved the specific title, whether it was honorable mention or fourth place or third place or whatever. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for I'm going to say excellence for any of these pieces that I've chosen in the use of color. And so I'm calling that color theory, putting colors, hues together in hue relationships, which we find on the color wheel. And I'm also looking for excellence in the elements of composition. And the things that I include in when I say elements of composition would be the types of lines and where the lines are placed in the composition to provide balance. And actually, all of these things that I mentioned are meant to be used together to provide balance in the composition. So it's negative space, which is a space where there isn't actually a design or a line or a shape. It's the area, maybe breathing room around things. And I look at the shapes. I look at the proportion of shapes, where they are placed, where the hues are placed, and the proportion of hues and how they relate to each other, any kinds of borders, and the idea of what the artist wanted to use as the focal point. The artist in any picture should make a decision for what he or she wants us to look at. What is the focal point in this piece? And sometimes there's more than one, but generally we want to move the eye through the whole composition and see everything, but some things are much more important than other things. And I think at the end, we want to really just focus on one thing. So the eye will travel around the whole composition and everything is taken into account. But if one thing is more important, then everything else is really supporting that, helping the eye move around the whole composition. And we can see that right away in a very successful piece. We can see it without understanding even. We don't have to be experts in this. We can really see, oh, I get it. I see what the important message is, the artist's message in this particular piece. It doesn't have to be something we relate to or that we have experienced as viewers, but visually everything is put together so that one thing is a very important focal point and everything else might be helping it subliminally or a little more directly to be that focal point. So I'm looking for that. So that's basically the definition of balance, visual balance in a piece. And that's what I'm looking for. And going beyond that, because that is the basic level of visual expression of art. Going beyond that, for your exhibition, you had a theme and you had three different qualifications that you wanted to impose upon the work, especially the works that were going to be chosen as the best. And so I was looking at those things to determine how all of those elements of composition and color helped us to understand the theme, which was contrast, and helped us to understand the ideas you had of community and pulling people together and having everybody from all different cultures be able to understand the work. So I hope that explains basically my thoughts, but then I'd like to get very specific when we look at each piece. Okay, so we're starting with this. I do want to say that this is not a level, I'm not saying we're going from the worst to the best. All of these works are wonderful, and all of these works are very different from each other. And I was attracted to all of them. I thought these, especially this painting, these works are beautiful, and this one is really, really beautiful. So I'm not going to comment on how beautiful it is because it's lovely, and the use of color is the use of line and shape and form is really more where I'm going with it. So a very nicely handled brush, but that's a given, of course. And I'm looking at a hue relationship of a red and green. Red and green are complementary, and we see other colors in there too, but we see most importantly the red, which is in the flowers. They're placed in the center. The eye likes to look at the center of any image, and these are placed very nicely in the center, so that naturally helps it to become the focal point. Red is a little stronger, more powerful, more passionate a color than green. And so red is going to pop forward. You might have heard that red comes forward and blue and greens tend to go backwards. And that actually is true of the behavior of color. So we have a lot of red elements here throughout the composition, and they help draw our eye through the whole composition. And then the flowers, the two flowers in the center, are the largest and most complex and take our eye most importantly, right to those flowers. And so I felt that the greens and then the very low value blacks and other hues were supporting the strength of the greens and of the reds, the red flowers in the center. And it's it's a very beautiful painting because we want to keep looking at it. Sometimes we see artworks where we see it for a second, we go, oh, that's great, and then we move on. But there's some complexity in this that feels enticing to the eye. It invites a longer look where we can look at the lines and the shapes. And I think it's something that we all can relate to. It's flowers. And so in terms of contrast and how it achieves that, there's the hue contrast, and then there's a value contrast, which means light and dark. We have the very light part of the whites and the yellows on the flowers, and the very low value dark part of the blacks. And they're in the background and they pop the flowers forward. So I think that's why this one is very successful.
Yeah, and to sort of add on to that, something that really interested me about this piece is that they're not using pure black and they're not using pure white anywhere in this piece. So that contrast with that main flower, the one that you immediately look at, it's done not by using those stark contrasted colors, but they really understood those color relationships there. And
That is
yeah,
so true. In a work of art, in a painting, you never even really have to use black. You can think about every single hue as a very low value, almost black, and it's so much richer. And here in this piece, we have very low value reds down at the bottom in the center. We have very low value greens. We have low value blues. And it makes it very rich. And if you want to see just the values, which is the light and the dark, all you have to do is squint your eyes when you look at this piece and you see dark, 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 and then the flowers and the leaves pop forward. And when you do that, you can see how nicely balanced this whole painting is. So yes, you're really correct. It's maybe just a little bit is actually black. I don't even know if anything is actually white, maybe one stroke here and there. And that gives it a tremendous richness. Okay, this is so exciting. I rarely see a piece that is just this triad. That's the hue relationship of red, yellow, and blue. Um, it's red, yellow, and blue are very different from each other, and that's the strong contrast that I see in this piece. They're so different. They seem almost red, yellow, and blue seem almost not to relate to each other because red doesn't have yellow or blue in it, and the same for all the other colors. And what I loved about this one is the red is playing the part of shadows. We see it, so our brains are maybe coming into play here, the way we understand life. And when we look at these horses, we say, oh, it's red shadows. And the red is more than just red. It's more than just there's yellow. It's almost like a light is shining. I'm sorry, they're cows. Are they cows?
I
I
believe
don't know what
horses. Yeah, the
they
title, primary horses.
Okay, right. So the yellow appears to be light on top of them, and then the red appears to be shadows, and so that makes it more complex. And the blue seems to be a lower value than the red, so it is and blue wants to pull into the background, red wants to come forward, and it's placed exactly where these colors seem to want to be. And that placement of the color, I think, is part of its strength. The balance is lovely. We have things that are hanging out in the center with the three horses. I love that the one in the very center has his little back to us. I like that they all feel like they're moving. We see movement in the way the painting is done. Not very solid lines. There's a lot of movement in the lines in between the colors. There's a lot of movement in the tails, and the two tails that we see are a combination of the red, yellow, and blue. And a little bit of red lines, very light brush strokes, brush marks on the bottom brings us, it sort of makes a very light border. And the other horizontal blue and red lines also makes a border where their feet are, bringing us up so that the eye looks at the horse's tails and the one on the left at his head. So all of these elements are working together to draw the eye to the most important part, which is the three horses together as the focal point. There are a lot of other lines, the blue background and the barn, it looks like barn doors. And I think their function is to also move the eye towards the center, up and down in the very center lines and horizontally across the top. And everything seems to be working together in unity so that we look at the three main horses. So I think it's extremely successful. And the contrast, it's on another level beyond just let's use color and line and form, and it becomes a unit. So everything is working, the colors, the lines, the shapes, and the placement and the proportion of colors, all working in unity to help us look at the focal point.
Right. This piece reminded me of the no tan exercises where artists will use only two colors. They'll use two colors, usually a black and a white, just to determine where your light source is and where your shadow is. And sometimes artists will do, a three no tan, a three color no tan, and they'll add a neutral. Um, so that's sort of what I'm seeing here. Although a neutral doesn't really stand out to me since the blue and the red you mentioned are so um, similar in value.
The blue and the red are similar, but I see the blue is lower in value slightly. So if I squint my eyes, I can see it, and the blue settles very nicely, willingly into the background. I think it's behaving very well, and I think you're correct about that, about the notan, and that's what the yellow and the red are performing. And it's amazing to me. Red always wants to scream and be the thing that we see, and the yellow is taming it somehow. The yellow is working with the red. Maybe it's because there's a little bit of a higher quantity of yellow than red. I don't know what it is, but they're equal partners in this painting. All three are equal partners. They all work very, very nicely together. And that's not an easy thing to do, I think. And this one, I love this one because of the contrast of the black and white photo and the orange shirt. It's almost simple, but it's so effective. And it's effective now because we get into the meaning of what are we looking at. Physically, we're looking at an orange thing in the middle of a black and white thing, but that's not all this is. This is a photograph of something that's actually happening and it's live. And we see it. It looks to me like a very specific place that I know. I don't know if it is in that place, but to me, it feels like Central Park, the wall. There's a wall that we see along Central Park. There's benches and the paving stones on the both of the paving stones on the ground. And it may not be there, but the thing is that for me, it relates to that location. So I'm taking it in my brain saying, oh, I know where that is. And then the second thing is I mean, this is more important, really. I'm relating to the man in his posture and maybe his age. And maybe I'm even ascribing emotions to him. Maybe he's relaxing, maybe he's comfortable, but his neck is bent in an elderly fashion, maybe an uncomfortable fashion, or it could be, a range of emotions, negative emotions or some way. And also because he's so small and the rest of the photo is larger, expressing the place where he is in, he feels a little solitary and possibly, if I ascribe emotions to him, possibly lonely or possibly not lonely, but alone. And maybe none of it is true, but the point that I'm making is that we connect emotionally with this, and the orange helps, and the lush trees and shadows also help to show us a very different feeling between the background and the man. And we see it right away and we feel something right away. And I think all of us can feel something looking at this, even if we don't know where it is. And we may all feel different things, which is really the power of art. We don't all have to feel the same thing when we look at it, as long as we relate to it in some way and we do feel something.
I'm curious about your thoughts on the composition of it. Uh, the choice to do a portrait landscape, sort of.
Hmm.
It's very tall vertically. I wonder if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, fascinating. Um, I see two diagonal lines that help to shorten it. One being between the two paved sections of the ground, and the other being the wall with the trees hanging over. And if they weren't there, I might feel that it was too long and I might start wanting to crop it. But because of those lines giving us, of course, they're giving us a direction and they're taking the eye into the background, um, they're a little stronger. Diagonals are very strong anyway, but they're a little stronger than the verticalness of the portrait. And then they also help us because in between the two lines we see right in the center, we see the orange shirt. So they help us focus in on his shirt. And then there is that little, it's maybe subliminal, the bench next to him, which is horizontal, is also pointing to him. And there's so much happening with these lines, those three lines and his shirt, that it takes over in importance and it takes importance away from the verticality of the portrait shape. Okay, another very interesting black and white with orange. It's funny how if we gave one assignment to 14 people, we could have all different kinds of assignments. Make it black and white with orange. It would be 14 different ways. And if each person did two things, it would be 28 different ways. And that's the beauty of everybody's creativity. So I see the contrast here, of course, in terms of black and white again, which is achromatic. It has no chroma. Black and white don't exist. Chroma means it would exist on the color wheel, which is the spectrum coming from the light of the sun. But black and white do not exist on the spectrum. But orange does. It is chromatic. And so there's a very strong contrast there. Of course, there's the black and white contrast. But I see a contrast here in terms of this woman in her character and her personality and maybe how she's feeling. If we look at her face, we begin to get very connected. Whenever we have a face in a picture, it is going to be the focal point. But the strength of this is it not only is the face the focal point, but her orange scarf and her very debonair hat are contributing to being the focal point, and they're very much an important part of this picture. So we have a lot of contrast going on that are all actually working very nicely together. I think she's compelling. We want to keep looking at her, which is a strength of a picture and is a reason for the success of the picture, of this particular one, and of any picture. When we want to keep looking at it, I think it strikes us emotionally and it has more strength in it. Everything here is working together very nicely. I like the choices of, for example, the white vertical line behind her, highlighting the edges of her face, her hat, and her scarf. And I think it helps draw the eye up to her face. We're going to see her face anyway. It is in the center, and her scarf is orange in the center anyway. It's just the way the eye moves that we want to look in the center. But all of those things are working together to keep our eye there. When we move around and see the rest of her body, it's also quite lovely. The edges of her blouse at the bottom, or her body, or whatever, being zigzag like that, I think is wonderful. And then the angles point up a little bit once again. Everything is helping us to look at this beautiful woman in the center. What else? What did you see in this?
I was gonna ask, would you say that your fashion design eye was what compelled you to this piece? It strikes me as a fashion illustration.
It does feel like that. But it's funny. I see that as secondary to her personality. I think she chose these clothes. Sometimes people put clothes on to, where the clothes wear them. You know, the clothes are just fabulous and too fabulous for the person. But there's something about her face that tells me that she is those clothes. She is that hat and that scarf and they're all working as one. But yes, it's a fabulous hat and a fabulous scarf. Okay, so now, why were those in honorable mention and these are in fourth, third, and second and first place? I see these as maybe having much more complexity. They also are very successful, and I'll go into how they're successful in terms of color and line and shape and form and the elements of composition. Of course, they have to be. But it goes beyond just the elements of composition and color, and it becomes an expression of something bigger that's happening. Well, let's start with the elements. So, we have the contrast of the color, the more intense color in the clothing that the little girl is wearing against the background, which is very low intensity. And we have the vertical lines and the diagonal and a little bit of curvilinear lines in her clothing and her head and her hands. And that's a contrast against the horizontal lines in the background, which I really enjoyed. And she really feels like she's moving because of the contrast. Horizontal lines they're kind of static and they don't really give us a feeling of movement. But once we place a figure with curvilinear and diagonal lines like hers on top of it, we definitely know she's moving, and the horizontal lines are saying that way, she's going that way. And of course, she's facing that way. And her attitude, now we get beyond the color. Her attitude is she is a very busy little girl. Maybe she's 6, and we're all familiar with 6-year-old girls, and they have a tremendous amount of energy, and they are always on the move, and they are always bright and cheery and bubbly. I mean, I hope they're always that way. That those are the ones that I'm familiar with, and very confident. And I see those qualities in her in this painting. I see it in the position of her head, in her hands. I see the way she's wearing the clothing. I see the way she put together the different colors in the clothing. Maybe her mommy got her dressed, but she's wearing them so they belong to her. And there are a lot of different oranges and reds, and those are very powerful colors. And in her community, I'm sure that those are the clothes that people wear. But again, they belong to her. They are her personality. And I see this even as something beyond a painting. I actually see a person, and that's the strength of this. And I see her landscape where she lives, and she is a bright, beautiful thing on this very quiet, low intensity landscape.
I also wanted to mention sort of the halo effect that she's got going here, that really pushes that contrast. You know, that bright white. You can tell it's a backlit photo, from where the light source is, but the halo specifically around the face, I think, really is what pushes this contrast that really makes the painting.
Yes, I agree with you and that's interesting because it's subliminal. It's maybe not the first thing that we're going to see, and it took me a while to even notice that. Um, it's very helpful, and I think it does what it's supposed to do, but it doesn't scream at us. So, and this being mixed media, I love the fact that we can't really tell which part is photo and which part is other, whether it's oil painting or acrylic or whatever. It's really everything is working together so well. I feel the velvetyness of her skirt, and it feels like a different fabric from her shawl, for want of a better word, whatever her wrap is. And then those textures feel very different from her hair and very different from the background. So I really love the combination of textures achieved by I don't even know what method, and I like the fact that I don't even know what was used where.
Yeah, I believe I believe the mixed media uh is
Mhm.
I believe there's pastels, there's paint, there's crayon, there's a little bit of photography and some metallic glazes. I wish I could see this piece in person, to sort of
Yes.
take in all of those different media, but yeah, a really,
Yes, I
really
would love to. And
beautiful
it's, of
painting.
course, we're looking at a little screen and it's much bigger. And with a painting like this, and I'm just using that word like metaphorically, painting, I would get up really close to it where the guard would yell at me, don't get so close, because I want to see how exactly the brush put those colors on that surface.
Right.
This was so much fun. Um, I hate to say that one piece is better than another, and then another is better than those two. And with all of these pieces, they're all really wonderful. It's very hard to put one above another. But what I see in this is um, obviously the contrast of light and dark, and the contrast of the brass against the background black and against the white. But what I really enjoyed was the complexity of it and the fact that I was confused about what it was until I really looked at it and realized those are feet. There are feet in those shoes. And if we go up the vertical lines implied by the almost non-existent pants and the brass, we begin to see, oh, there are also hands and sleeves, and it is people. And it took me a while to realize there are people standing behind the brass instruments. And I loved it. I love the confusion until I really figure it out. And then what I love is if I go away from it and come back to it, there's that confusion all over again. It's just visually lines and white and contrasts of brass against black and white and shoes. And everything, all the lines are placed very well. They move, and by placed very well, I mean they move the eye around the entire composition so that we see every part of the composition. And eventually we focus on the center. And we have lots of different kinds of lines. We have heavy verticals, but they do not take over because we have lots of diagonals and curvilinears. And most important curvilinear being the white of the sleeves around the top. And they all contribute to moving the eye around it and focusing it on what we actually want to see.
Yeah, I think this is a great example of what you were saying at the beginning, sort of where you were looking for what you were looking for in your selections. You were saying positive and negative space. And I see a lot of that in this one where, the black is that negative space, and these brass tones, the whites, those are your positive space. Uh, so I
Yes,
think it's a great example.
this is an excellent example of the really positive use of negative space. Let's say the excellent use of negative space. Beautiful. It's just beautiful because of that. And not just black and white, but brass and everything working together. And even some of the instruments are black, which is lovely. And we see them. That's what's surprising to me. In spite of the fact that the background is black, we do see the black instruments. And I guess it's because it's a photo and there's a little white along the edges. Maybe that helps.
Yeah.
So once again, the confusion for a second or two is so exciting here. Not as much confusion as in the other piece, but more the incongruity of these are naked figures and the heads are way down below around their knees, and the figures are white and they're stone, they're marble, and then the heads are very much alive. So it feels almost like we've seen a couple black and white with color photos, and this one is possibly all in color because the figures are actually marble, but it gives that same impression where there's that contrast of black and white against human skin tone, flesh tone. But what's really enjoyable and amusing to me is what they are looking at. I don't know what their intent on, but they're very, very, very intent on legs or feet or something. And when we look at this, we really look above the heads. We're looking at the whole body. We're looking at the female form and the arm and, the breast and everything. And it's curved around on the sides with their garments. So we see so much more than what they're focusing on. I don't know, they have maybe one little spot on one little leg. So we have the contrast of color, and then we also have the contrast of line and proportion. There's ever so much more of the white, and by white, I'm generalizing because it's not really white, it's gray and a lot of different values of gray. And then the little tiny circles of their heads. And it shows you how we can look at something that's so very small, meaning their heads, against everything else, so much, such a high proportion of the white and the grays in the sculptures. And yet we look at their little tiny heads. And that's because of the power of the color against the black and white. It can be very small, and yet that's the thing we're going to look at. Of course, it's helpful that they're in the center, but I believe wherever they were placed, we would still look at them. And we would look at them because they're a human face, and human faces are generally the thing that would draw our attention. Even if they were on the very bottom of the picture or on the very right side or the top corner, it would still be the thing we look at. But it looks very balanced to have one in between the first two figures and another in between the right two figures.
I think it's interesting that you sort of mention it as almost a conceptual contrast. The
Hmm.
marble statues having no heads versus the
Yes.
visitors having heads that we're drawn to. I think that's a really interesting aspect of this photo. And also, uh, thinking of myself, I'm not a photographer by any means, but I would have waited for the people to pass by before I took a picture of the statues. So it's really interesting that the artist chose to capture that moment, finding those windows between the marble statues to capture the person. Uh, I think that's a very interesting part of this piece.
Oh, wait, what do you mean when you say you would have waited for the people to pass by? You mean the men
Yeah, the
down at
men
the
in the
bottom?
background. Yeah. I,
Oh, you know what's funny? I looked at them as if they were workers and they're fixing something on the statue.
One of them looks like he's on his phone.
I didn't notice that. You're so
Yeah.
right. That is
Yeah.
hysterical.
But, even without the people, you can still make a case that this piece is really emphasizing contrast. Those values.
Yes, it is. It is. But the complexity and the connection I'm making with it really comes from the humans behind the sculptures.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I made some assumption about what they're doing. It's like totally wrong. I didn't notice the phone and I just said, oh, they must be working on the sculpture. And then I didn't look any further to see if they actually were or were not. It's just what we do, we make these assumptions. But it's okay. It's art and we draw from it whatever our crazy minds want to draw from it.
Exactly.
Yes, so we have best in show. Um, Again, these are all so beautiful, and it's really hard to say this is better than this. It's just maybe it hit more points for me. It just struck more points. Starting at the base level of the hierarchy, where I was talking about color and design. Um, I'm looking at red, which wants to come forward, and blue, which wants to go back, and the colors are placed properly. That's not always the case. A lot of paintings might have had in here we have the red in the center, and the red wants to come forward, and we want to look at the center. But a lot of paintings might have had blue in the center, or maybe that red would not have been there in the center, or the red would have been on the side or something. So then it wouldn't be where it naturally wants to go. Or maybe the blue would have been on top of the red, physically pushing the red down. But in that case, red usually still fights and it's still pushing forward against the blue. But this one didn't have that issue either. Here we have the red in terms of letters, Hebrew letters. I don't know if they're words. I don't know if they're meant to be words. I don't know if they're meant to say anything. And I think it's the case where it probably has tremendous meaning to the artist. And we, whether we're the same culture or not, are not necessarily understanding what that meaning is, but we still can feel the power of it, even if we don't know exactly from whence it comes. But anyway, color, we're still on color. The fact that, to me, the fact that the letters are many colors, there's yellow, there's orange, there's different reds, there's blues, and possibly greens, is on this very high value background of blue. It makes them all pop, and it gives them movement. It gives them tremendous circular movement. And of course, the circles are already expressed in the blue, but the reds and all those colors are helping us move around. So that's one of the most important things in a work of art, that every element help the eye move through the whole thing and help us to actually focus on the center. And we do, there's that little yellow circle in the center on a sea of Hebrew letters. They can mean many things. Culturally, I could express what I think it means. It doesn't really matter, whatever I think, and it doesn't really mean that's what it does mean. But I'm what I'm pulling out is that there's a very strong emotional meaning in this picture. There is something happening, a whirlwind of events, maybe. There are certain people who are affected. I'm sure the red letters refer to something that is being very much affected by the power of the circles, the whirlwind that I'm seeing going around. And I feel the power. I can make up stuff in my own head what it might mean, or I can actually know what it means, but it doesn't matter. It's one or the other way. I still have an emotional connection to it. And like I said before, it's very important that we want to keep looking at a painting. And as we look at it more and more, we see more and more things. And so as I look at it more and more, I notice in a positive way that if we look at the corners, the lower left corner and the lower right corner, and then the right side, those colors, I'm still thinking about color, are higher values, meaning they're very much lighter and they're less intense. It's funny, I'm pointing to it, but you can't see my fingers, so I'm not being useful. The more intense colors are circling around the center, and then we have that center very intense yellow. So, what did you think of it, Eleanor?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you chose this piece because it doesn't scream contrast to me, but what you're really looking at is those color compositions, those color relationships between, you know, the complementary, the orange and the blue. So I think it's a fascinating piece, and really I think it's neat that you're looking at contrast through different lenses, through, you know, different perspectives. I think uh, you know, you're not looking at black and white. You're looking at, you know, how it relates to color and value. And um, it's you're definitely you've gone into depth with these pieces, and this piece is no exception. And I think
Yes, you're correct. I do. I like your phrase, looking at it with different lenses. I think that's a really apt description of what I do. It's almost like I have five pairs of glasses on the table and then I put them on one by one, one at a time. One of them is what are the hues? And another is what are the intensities? What are the values of these colors? Value being light and dark, intensity being, look at that orange, it's very intense in the center, and look at the orange and around the edges, they're very, very soft and hardly any, not intense at all. And then the other glasses I put on are the types of lines and the proportions and the negative space and all of the things that I've mentioned. And I see in this piece, I see contrasts in all of those elements, but I don't feel like they're just put there gratuitously. I think they're put there as part of the large plan of the piece, and they all work together. They work in unity, and that's why I feel it's so successful and why I feel it's so powerful that they
Yeah,
all are working in unity.
yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned intensity. And the colors are very intense. But also, this of course happens when you mix your complementary colors, but you start to mix some neutrals. I'm seeing that with some of the lettering, where, those colors have sort of mixed and they make sort of a muted version of those colors together. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Very few of them are muted. There are some really dark, low value blues, and I guess you could say those are muted. Even the black could be a little bit muted. And the reds, of course, are intense, and the oranges are intense. But I'm looking around, and most of the letters are very intense red. Most of them are. I'm
Yeah,
sure they're saying something. I would love to know what they're saying.
yeah,
And
yeah.
this is coming from, I learned Hebrew when I was a kid, but I obviously didn't learn that well. And, I know they're Hebrew letters, but I don't know what the words are. Maybe I should show it to my daughter. She would probably be able to interpret it for me. Maybe it's telling, it says the Book of Jonah Part Two. Maybe it's telling the story, or maybe it's the artist's version of what Part Two would be. Maybe it's a comment on the situation in our lives right now. Um, Probably it is. It would be so interesting to have an artist talk about it.
Yeah. Well, definitely check out the artist statements. All of the artist statements for all of these works are online. Uh, so if any of our viewers are interested, definitely check out the works online and also the other works in the exhibition. So here's just a list of all of the awards that we mentioned, our honorable mentions and our awarded pieces. And here is a collage that shows some of the other works in the exhibition. So if our viewers are interested in taking a look at what other kind of works we've got on display, this gives a little bit of an idea of what this show looks like. And
Yes, I know. I've chosen some of those to be in the display because they were all lovely. All of these works were really lovely.
any final thoughts on the show?
Just that I enjoyed this tremendously. Your artists, your members, and everybody else who had works in the show were just very talented and very serious about what they do, and I really appreciate that. I honor creativity. I admire it so much. I've seen a lot of very creative people in my long career, and these young students who I teach. They grow into such mature, wonderful artists, and to me, it's creativity is the most amazing thing. So I think everybody did a wonderful job, and we just keep moving forward and getting better and better.
Well, thank you so much, Marcie, and thank you to everyone who submitted, who got their works in, and thank you to everyone at MFA.